A lot of people today claim that modern civilization is dying because humanity has lost its faith. But let's unpack that for a second. Can faith even be taken away? It's not a wallet or a passport. It lives inside a person. No external force can rip out someone's conviction that the world was created by a higher power, or, on the contrary, that it runs on the laws of physics and biology. People decide for themselves what to believe. When societies move away from traditional beliefs, it's not the result of some malicious plot. It's a natural stage of growing up. All religions and ideologies have an inherent tendency toward aggression. It doesn't matter how peaceful they present themselves. Even the teaching of "turn the other cheek" didn't stop Christians from persecuting heretics for centuries or launching crusades. Leaders who preached peace in theory often turned on their own allies in practice. Ideology almost inevitably becomes a tool of conflict. It unites us against them, offers ready-made answers to questions like how the world works and how one should live, and relieves people of the burden of thinking for themselves. In that sense, even something as trivial as football club loyalty functions like a mini ideology. The same people, divided by scarf colors, can end up in conflict. It's just one way of channeling our built-in aggression. At the same time, science and technology really do push societies toward greater humanization. Over the long run, levels of violence have been declining. Ideologies and religions that were once mandatory for everyone are gradually moving into the background. In developed societies, they become a private matter. No one forces you to believe in a specific God or follow a particular doctrine. The social contract boils down to a simple principle: follow the rules and don't interfere with others. A dense, diverse urban society simply can't function under a single, shared worldview. The more diverse people are, the harder it is to impose one correct picture of reality. That's why modern civilization has moved away from official ideologies, to prevent constant conflict in conditions of close coexistence. Many ideologues and religious thinkers insist that people shouldn't live for happiness or pleasure. They argue that we're meant to serve something greater: our nation, our class, our God, some grand idea. Life, they say, only gains meaning through sacrifice and service. But let's look at that without illusions. Serving others can absolutely bring deep fulfillment. In many ways, that's built into us by evolution. Being useful to the group once increased our chances of survival. Plenty of people genuinely find joy in helping, creating, and caring for others. But it's not a universal formula. Meaning in life is whatever closes the loop on a person's internal needs. And those needs differ from one individual to another. They're shaped by innate traits, upbringing, and personal experience. What gives one person a sense of completeness may feel like a waste of time to someone else. And this is exactly where manipulation creeps in. When we're told that happiness lies in serving society, that we should live not for ourselves, but for higher goals, or that we should reject comfort in pursuit of greatness, it often functions as a tool of control. The people promoting these ideas usually benefit from others behaving in certain ways. If higher birth rates are desirable, then large families are framed as the highest value. If self-sacrifice is needed, then dying heroically in war is elevated into the meaning of life. But no amount of ideological conditioning guarantees that someone who follows these prescriptions will actually be happy. They may end up feeling empty, disillusioned, or burned out, because their own needs don't align with the imposed model. Science offers a more sober answer. Evolution, both biological and social, has no external purpose. It has direction, but no predefined meaning. There is no absolute truth that can be definitively handed down by a god, a leader, or an ideology. There are only different perspectives, and that leads to an important conclusion. People are free to define their own goals. One person finds meaning in family and children, another in scientific discovery, a third in collecting or sports, a fourth in exploring space. Some people take pleasure in simply unwinding after work, others in demanding intellectual pursuits. None of these choices is inherently more correct than the others. It's their life, their resources, and their source of fulfillment. Living for pleasure isn't something base, it's natural. Without it, life inevitably turns into a chain of deprivation and suffering. Even those who create great things, from scientists to artists, aren't driven by abstract duty, but by an inner drive that brings them deep satisfaction. Their higher purpose is, in practice, still a form of personal motivation, just a more complex and demanding one. Another common claim goes like this: without religion, society supposedly loses its moral compass and starts to fall apart. At first glance, that sounds plausible. But if you look a little closer, morality gets along just fine without religion. In fact, it's much older. It grew out of our biology, from the behavior of social animals that could only survive together. Picture our distant ancestors, primates living in small groups. On your own, survival was nearly impossible. Predators everywhere, constant food shortages, the ever-present risk of injury. Under those conditions, natural selection didn't favor kindness, in some abstract human sense. It favored behaviors that helped the group hold together. This wasn't about lofty ideals. It was a hard-nosed survival strategy. Those who supported others and maintained social bonds were more likely to leave descendants. Over time, several core mechanisms emerged. First, kin selection. By helping your relatives, you're quite literally helping your own genes. You can see this clearly in many animals. Chimpanzees, bonobos, wolves, they'll take risks for their own. In humans, this shows up as an almost automatic concern for family and children, regardless of any formal moral teaching. Second, reciprocal altruism. The basic, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours principle. If I share with you today, and you share with me tomorrow, we both come out ahead. Over the long run, these strategies are stable. Habitual cheaters tend to get pushed out of the group pretty quickly. You can even see this in primate politics: temporary alliances, mutual support, shifting loyalties. Then there's reputation. Even if you've never helped me personally, if you're known as someone who helps others, I'm more likely to treat you well. In any group, people are constantly watching each other, and that creates powerful pressure. It's not just what you do, but how it's perceived. In humans, this mechanism has scaled up into gossip, rumor, and now social media. A significant chunk of our mental bandwidth is devoted to tracking who's doing what and how they're seen. Finally, there's the group level. Sometimes it pays to act not just in the interest of close kin or direct partners, but to support the group as a whole. Groups where individuals are willing to sacrifice a little for the common good often end up more stable and successful than groups made up entirely of self-interested individuals. In a world of constant competition between groups, that had real survival value. Out of these mechanisms, what we call morality gradually took shape, a set of emotional responses and intuitions that guide behavior. Empathy lets us quite literally feel what others are going through. A sense of fairness helps us spot cheating and unequal exchanges. Shame and guilt act as internal brakes, stopping us from damaging our relationships. Anger and moral outrage, on the other hand, function as external enforcement. They signal that violations won't go unanswered. You can observe all of this, not just in humans, but in other social animals as well, albeit in simpler forms. With the emergence of language and the ability to understand other minds, these basic mechanisms began to crystallize into norms, rules that could be passed down culturally. But their foundation never went anywhere. Religion didn't create morality from scratch. It systematized pre-existing patterns, gave them symbolic form, and reinforced them through tradition and authority. Commandments like "don't kill" or "don't steal" aren't so much divine revelations as they are formalizations of what already worked in human communities. As societies grow more complex, morality doesn't disappear. It expands. The circle of us gradually extends beyond family and immediate surroundings to include strangers, other nations, and eventually even animals and future generations. That's one of the key reasons violence has declined over the long term. Not because religiosity increased, but because empathy widened. In that sense, morality isn't a gift from above, or the product of abstract philosophy. It's an evolutionary tool, one that once helped our ancestors survive, and now allows us to build complex societies. It works whether a person believes or not, whether they're familiar with religious texts or not. And arguably, it works best when we stop trying to anchor it to some higher source and instead understand its real roots, so we can consciously refine these mechanisms and complement them with culture and reason. When people say, "We've forgotten God, and that's why everyone's miserable," they're getting the causality wrong. The modern generation that openly says it wants to live for happiness is just being honest about the only slogan that actually works. "Let's all suffer together for the sake of greatness" isn't exactly a winning pitch. People want to live here and now, and there's nothing wrong with that. That said, the nostalgia crowd isn't entirely off base. There is a kernel of truth in the claim that things used to be better. Depression and burnout have become more visible. According to the World Health Organization, depression remains one of the leading causes of disability worldwide. The real question is, why? For one, we've simply gotten better at recognizing it. Psychological literacy has improved. What used to be brushed off as just tired or that's just how they are is now identified as an actual problem. Diagnostic criteria have broadened. More people seek help, and that's more a sign of progress than decline. At the same time, the modern world has introduced new, powerful sources of stress that have nothing to do with any loss of faith. Social media creates a constant comparison loop. We're not seeing people's real lives, just the highlight reel, and a brain wired for small, close-knit groups doesn't handle that stream very well. Add to that chronic uncertainty, information overload, and work that often feels disconnected from any sense of purpose. Urban living and sedentary lifestyles don't help either. We're operating in an environment evolution never prepared us for. Even environmental factors, like extreme heat, are increasingly being linked to higher levels of anxiety and depression. It's important not to jump from this to civilization is collapsing. The picture is more nuanced. According to the World Happiness Report 2026, in most countries, young people today report higher levels of happiness than they did 20 years ago. The problems tend to cluster in specific regions and social groups, especially where social media pressure and perfectionism hit hardest. But the key point is this: these issues aren't solved by returning to a single, shared belief system. They're addressed with the tools provided by science, culture, and individual freedom. But what if this isn't abstract? What if it's personal? What if burnout or depression isn't a theory, but your current reality? When your brain just won't engage, and advice like "find your purpose" feels almost insulting. In that situation, it helps to reframe the problem. Living for pleasure doesn't mean do whatever you want and be happy. It means acknowledging that your internal systems aren't functioning as they should and need to be gradually restored. Not through sacrifice to some abstract, higher goal, but through things that have proven effective both evolutionarily and in practice. Start with the basics: movement, sleep, nutrition, real social contact. These aren't cliches. They're the foundation your mental state rests on. Even moderate physical activity triggers the same neurobiological processes that once kept us engaged with the group. Face-to-face interaction works differently from digital communication. It still activates those mechanisms of reciprocity and trust that social life was built on. Getting your routine back on track isn't about discipline for the sake of a goal. It's about restoring normal functioning. The next layer is using tools modern science actually provides. Cognitive behavioral therapy, medication when dealing with clinical depression, mindfulness techniques. These aren't spiritual practices in the religious sense, but targeted ways of working with the mind. And finally, scale matters. You don't have to figure out the meaning of life all at once. It's far more productive to start small. Find something that brings even a slight sense of relief or interest. It could be anything: a walk, a shower, picking up an old hobby. The goal isn't to match someone else's idea of a proper life, but to gradually reconnect with your own sources of satisfaction. Those differ for everyone, and that's normal. For some, it's family. For others, work or research. For some, simple forms of rest. And for some, religious faith. I'm not denying its value as a personal tool. If it helps, there's no issue with that. The point is simply that it's no longer a universal solution, and it doesn't work the same way for everyone. The freedom to be yourself isn't just about choosing goals when things are going well. It's also about taking responsibility for yourself when things get hard. No God, ideology, or state can live that part of life for you. But that's precisely why no one can take away your ability to gradually rebuild your life either. Not through sacrifice to some abstract, higher purpose, but by returning to what makes your life, personally, feel meaningful and alive. Thank you for listening. If you think this was interesting or useful, hit like and subscribe.